The Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 cycles. In all that time, no species had ever challenged their power. No fleet had ever matched their strength. No world had ever refused to bow before them. High Counselor sat upon his throne on the capital world of Prime, confident that his empire would last for another 12,000 cycles more. He had over 900 sentient species across the galaxy, and every single one of them now served the empire. This was the natural order of things. There were the masters, and everyone else existed to serve them. 40 standard cycles ago, scout ships had discovered a small blue planet in a remote corner of the galaxy. The planet was called Earth by its inhabitants, a species that called themselves humans. The scouts had watched these creatures for several rotations. They lived in primitive cities. They fought wars with simple weapons. They had barely managed to reach their own moon. The scouts had laughed at them. These humans were nothing. They were weak, fragile, and utterly insignificant. When a human exploration vessel had wandered too close to space, the scouts had destroyed it without hesitation. They killed every human aboard and recorded their screams as entertainment. The Empire classified humanity as a non-threat species, too primitive to ever matter. The file was archived and forgotten. No one gave the humans another thought. That was a mistake. At the edge of the nebula, a patrol fleet drifted through the darkness of space. Commander Aura stood on the bridge of her cruiser, bored and restless. Patrol duty in this sector was punishment, not honor. Nothing ever happened here. The nebula was too far from any trade routes, too distant from any conquered worlds. She had been stationed here for 3 cycles, and in all that time she had seen nothing but empty space and dying stars. Her scanner officer, a young named, suddenly sat up straight at his console. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he studied his readings. Something was wrong. The numbers on his screen made no sense. "Commander," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I am detecting an anomaly." Aura walked over to his station and looked at the display. At first, she thought the equipment was malfunctioning. The readings showed a massive energy signature emerging from a fold in space, but the fold itself was impossible. They had mastered faster-than-light travel thousands of cycles ago, but this was different. This was something they had never seen before. "What is that?" she asked. Shook his head. "I do not know, Commander. The energy output is beyond anything in our records. It is larger than our dreadnoughts, much larger." Aura felt a cold sensation crawl down her spine. She ordered all ships to battle stations and demanded a visual feed. The main screen flickered, and then she saw it. A ship emerged from the fold in space, but calling it a ship felt wrong. It was a mountain of metal, a fortress that floated among the stars. It stretched nearly 40 kilometers from bow to stern, bristling with structures and systems that Aura could not identify. The dreadnoughts were the largest vessels in the known galaxy, and this thing dwarfed them completely. Her entire patrol fleet could fit inside its cargo bay. "That is impossible," she whispered. She ordered her scanner officer to identify the vessel. He tried every frequency, every database, every archive in the Imperial records. Nothing matched. The ship's design was completely unknown. Its technology registered as theoretical impossibilities. When attempted to calculate its power output, his instruments simply failed. They were not built to measure numbers that large. Aura opened a communication channel to the unknown vessel. She demanded identification in the name of the Galactic Empire. She warned them that failure to respond would be considered an act of war. She used every threat and every protocol she had been taught. There was no response. The massive ship simply hung in space, silent and still. It did not attack. It did not flee. It just waited as if it was studying them. Far away, on the bridge of that impossible vessel, Captain Daniel stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had served in the human military for 30 years, and he had waited for this moment for most of his adult life. The ship he commanded was called the Titan's Wrath, and it represented everything humanity had built in secret over the past 4 decades. His executive officer, Commander Vance, stood beside him. She was younger than him, with sharp features and a calm voice that never wavered. She had grown up on stories of the massacre, the day when scouts had murdered human explorers and laughed about it. Every human knew that story. Every human remembered. "The patrol fleet is hailing us," she reported. "They are demanding identification." Nodded slowly. "Let them wait." The bridge crew worked in silence around them. 12,000 humans served aboard the Titan's Wrath, and every single one of them understood what this mission meant. This was not exploration. This was not diplomacy. This was humanity's announcement to the galaxy that they were no longer hiding. Chief Engineer Cole's voice came through the intercom. "Captain, all systems are nominal. The jump was successful. Quantum singularity engine is stable. Weapons are online. Shields are at full power." Allowed himself a small smile. 40 years ago, humanity had been primitive. They had been weak. They had been prey. But humans had one quality that they had failed to understand. They learned. They adapted. They grew stronger from their pain. After the massacre, humanity had gone silent. They had hidden themselves from the galaxy and turned inward. Every resource, every mind, every ounce of human creativity had been poured into a single goal. They would never be victims again. They would build something that would make the galaxy tremble. And they had succeeded. Commander Vance looked at the scanner display showing the tiny patrol ships. They looked like insects compared to the Titan's Wrath. She almost felt sorry for them. Almost. "Captain," she said quietly, "what are your orders?" Daniel stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Prime, the heart of the Empire that had murdered his friends and called humanity vermin. He thought about the explorers who had died screaming while aliens laughed. He thought about the decades of fear and hiding and desperate work. "Set course for space," he said. "It is time they learned who we are." The Titan's Wrath began to move, and the patrol fleet could do nothing but watch. Aura sent an emergency transmission to the Imperial capital, her voice shaking as she described what she had witnessed. She did not know what that ship was or where it had come from. But she knew, deep in her bones, that everything was about to change. The message from Commander Aura reached Prime within hours. High Counselor was pulled from his sleep to view the recordings. He sat in his private chambers, his ancient face twisted with confusion as he watched the footage of the massive ship emerging from impossible space. His advisors stood around him in nervous silence, waiting for his reaction. "This is a trick," said finally. "Someone is trying to frighten us." His military advisor, General, stepped forward, was a decorated warrior who had crushed rebellions on 100 worlds. He feared nothing in the galaxy, or so he had always believed. But the footage troubled him deeply. "High Counselor, our sensors confirm the readings. That ship is real, its size is real, its power output is real." He paused, struggling to say the next words. "We have never seen anything like it." Waved his hand dismissively. "Then it must be ancient technology. Perhaps the Void Walkers left something behind before they vanished. Perhaps it is a weapon from the old wars." The Empire's chief scientist, Hex, shook her head. She was old even by standards, and she had spent her entire life studying the technology of the galaxy. She had seen wonders and horrors beyond counting, but this ship filled her with a fear she could not explain. "The energy signatures are wrong for ancient technology," she said carefully. "The construction methods are too advanced. Based on my analysis, this vessel was built recently, within the last 50 cycles." The room fell silent. 50 cycles was nothing. The Empire had taken thousands of cycles to build their dreadnoughts. No species could develop such technology in 50 cycles. It was simply not possible. "Then who built it?" demanded. Hex pulled up a file on her data pad. It was old and dusty, buried deep in the Imperial archives. The file was labeled with a single word: humans. 40 cycles ago, we discovered a primitive species on a small planet called Earth. We classified them as non-threatening and forgot about them. She looked up at the High Counselor with worried eyes. I believe we made a terrible mistake. On board the Titan's Wrath, Chief Engineer Cole led Captain through the lower decks of the ship. Cole was a large man with thick arms and grease-stained hands. He had helped design the Titan's Wrath from the very beginning, and he knew every system, every wire, every plate of armor. After the massacre, we knew we could not match them with conventional technology, Cole explained as they walked through the humming corridors. Their ships were faster, stronger, and more advanced than anything we could build. If we tried to catch up to them, it would take us 1,000 years. We did not have 1,000 years. Nodded, he remembered those dark days after the attack, the fear, the anger, the desperate search for any path forward. So we cheated, Cole continued with a grim smile. We stopped trying to copy their technology and started inventing our own. We asked questions that nobody else was asking. We took risks that nobody else would take. They entered the engine room and felt the familiar hum of power vibrating through his bones. At the center of the room, contained within layers of shielding and magnetic fields, was a sphere of pure darkness. It was a quantum singularity, a tiny black hole that the engineers had learned to tame and control. It produced more energy than a star. They use fusion reactors, Cole said. Good technology, reliable technology. They have used it for 10,000 cycles because it works, but it has limits. Our singularity engine has no limits. We can power weapons they cannot imagine. We can generate shields they cannot break. We can fold space in ways they do not understand. Stared at the dark sphere. So much power contained in something so small. Humanity had done the impossible because they had no other choice. Commander Vance met them as they returned to the bridge. She handed a data pad with the latest intelligence reports. Her expression was carefully neutral, but could see the satisfaction in her eyes. They are panicking, she said. Their communications network is surprisingly easy to access. Their encryption is basic. Raised an eyebrow, basic. They have not updated their security protocols in over 2,000 cycles. They never needed to. No one has ever challenged them. Vance allowed herself a small smile. They are not used to being afraid. The data pad showed intercepted messages from across the Empire. Admirals were arguing about how to respond. Governors were demanding protection. Scientists were scrambling to understand what they were facing. The word impossible appeared again and again. Lieutenant Torres, the ship's communications officer, looked up from his station. He was young, barely 30 years old, but he had trained his entire life for this mission. Captain, they have dispatched scout ships to intercept us. 12 vessels approaching fast. Considered his options. He could destroy the scouts easily. The Titan's Wrath carried weapons that could crack planets, but that was not the message he wanted to send. Not yet. Do not destroy them, he ordered. Relocate them. Torres blinked in confusion. Sir. Use the spatial displacement system. Send them somewhere far away, somewhere they cannot bother us. Torres nodded and entered the commands. On the main screen, they watched as the 12 scout ships suddenly vanished. They were not destroyed. They were simply moved, deposited instantly in a distant corner of the galaxy, millions of light years from their original position. They would survive, confused and terrified, with a story to tell. Back on Prime, General received the report of the vanished scouts. His hands trembled as he read the data. The human ship had not fired a single weapon. It had simply relocated his ships. It had folded space around them and thrown them across the galaxy like pebbles. How, he whispered, how is this possible? Hex studied the readings with growing horror. They have technology we do not understand. They have power we cannot measure. In 40 cycles, they have advanced further than we have in 12,000. High Counselor sat in stunned silence. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he had never experienced before. He felt small. He felt powerless. "What do they want?" he asked. No one had an answer. The human ship continued its journey toward the heart of the Empire, and no force in the galaxy seemed capable of stopping it. They had built their civilization on the belief that they were the greatest species in existence. That belief was dying with every passing hour. The Imperial Senate gathered in emergency session for the first time in 300 cycles. Senators from across the Empire filled the great chamber on Prime, their voices rising in argument and fear. They had ruled the galaxy for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to be threatened. Now they were learning. High Counselor stood at the center of the chamber, trying to maintain order. But even his ancient authority could not calm the growing panic. Reports were coming in from every corner of the Empire. The human ship was moving steadily toward the capital, and nothing could slow it down. "We must negotiate," one senator shouted. "We must find out what they want." "We must attack," another demanded. "Gather the Grand Fleet and destroy them before they reach us." "With what?" a third voice called out. "You saw what they did to our scouts. They moved them across the galaxy without firing a shot. What chance does the Grand Fleet have?" The arguments continued, growing louder and more desperate. Had never seen his people so afraid. They had conquered 900 species. They had crushed every rebellion, defeated every enemy, dominated every corner of known space. And now a single ship from a species they had dismissed as primitive was making them tremble. He raised his hand for silence. "We will attempt communication," he announced. "We will learn what these humans want. Perhaps there is a way to resolve this without war." General stepped forward, his face grim. "And if they do not want to talk?" Had no answer. On the Titan's Wrath, Captain stood on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Commander Vance found him there, standing alone in the darkness. She had served with him for 15 years, and she had never seen him so quiet. "They are trying to contact us," she said. "They want to negotiate." "Did not turn around, I know." "What should I tell them?" He was silent for a long moment. Somewhere out there, 40 years in the past, human explorers had died in the cold vacuum of space. They had come in peace, filled with hope and wonder at the vast universe. They had been murdered for entertainment. Had known some of those explorers. He had trained with them. He had dreamed the same dreams they dreamed. When news of the massacre reached Earth, something had broken inside him. Something had broken inside all of humanity. "We will not negotiate," he said finally. "Not yet. First, they need to understand." He turned and walked toward the bridge, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Vance followed him, wondering what he meant. When they reached the command center, gave a series of orders. The Titan's Wrath changed course slightly, moving toward an uninhabited moon on the edge of a nearby star system. The moon was small and lifeless, just a ball of rock and ice drifting through space. It had no value. No one would miss it. "Lieutenant Tors said calmly, "Open a channel to all frequencies. Make sure they can see what happens next." Tors nodded and activated the transmission systems. Across the Empire, billions of suddenly found their screens filled with an image of the human ship. They watched in confused silence, not understanding what they were seeing. Weapons Officer Price sat at her console, her fingers resting on the controls. She was a serious woman with cold blue eyes who rarely spoke unless she had something important to say. She had spent 20 years preparing for this moment. "Target the moon," ordered. "Single shot, minimum power." Price entered the commands. Deep within the Titan's Wrath, weapons systems that they could not comprehend began to charge. The ship hummed with energy that could reshape reality itself. "Firing," Price announced. A beam of light erupted from the Titan's Wrath. It was not plasma. It was not kinetic energy. It was something else entirely, something that existed at the boundary between matter and energy. The beam struck the moon and passed through it like sunlight through glass. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the moon simply ceased to exist. It did not explode. It did not shatter. It was there one moment and gone the next, its entire mass converted into pure energy that scattered harmlessly across the void. Where a moon had once orbited, there was now only empty space. Across the empire, silence fell. Senators stared at their screens in horror. Admirals felt their blood run cold. High Counselor gripped his throne with trembling hands. In one instant, humanity had demonstrated power beyond anything they could imagine. On the Titan's wrath, Lieutenant Torres opened the communication channel. Captain stepped forward, knowing that his words would be heard on 1,000 worlds. 40 cycles ago you found us, he began, his voice steady and calm. We were a young species just beginning to explore the stars. We came in peace. We came with open hands, and you killed us. He paused, letting the words sink in. You murdered our explorers. You recorded their deaths for entertainment. You called us vermin and forgot we existed. You were certain that we would never matter. His eyes hardened. You were wrong. Vance watched him speak, feeling pride and sorrow mixing in her chest. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her, stories of the dark days after the massacre, the grief, the rage, the burning determination to survive. We are humanity, continued. We remember everything. We do not forget, we do not forgive, and we are no longer hiding. He signaled Torres to end the transmission. The screen went dark. On Prime, High Counselor sat in stunned silence. He understood now. This was not an invasion. This was not conquest. This was something far more terrifying. This was a reckoning. The humans were coming, and they carried 40 years of pain and fury with them. They had transformed themselves from prey into predators, and they wanted the galaxy to know it. General broke the silence. High Counselor, what are your orders? Looked at the empty space where the moon had been. One shot. That was all it had taken. One shot at minimum power. Gather the Grand Fleet, he said quietly. All 8,000 ships. We have no choice but to fight. But even as he gave the order, he knew in his heart that it would not be enough. Nothing would be enough. The monster ship was coming. The Grand Fleet of the Empire assembled in the space above their capital world. 8,000 warships gathered from every corner of the galaxy, called home by the desperate orders of High Counselor. It was the largest military force ever assembled in the history of the Empire. Dreadnoughts the size of cities floated alongside cruisers and destroyers without number. Fighter craft swarmed between the larger vessels like schools of fish. The combined firepower of this fleet could destroy planets. It had crushed every enemy the Empire had ever faced. General stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Pride of. He stared at the tactical display showing his assembled forces and tried to feel confident. 8,000 ships against one. The numbers should guarantee victory. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the moon vanishing into nothing. One shot. Minimum power. His officers moved around him, preparing for battle. They checked weapons systems and shield generators. They ran simulations and reviewed protocols. They did everything they had been trained to do, but could see the fear in their eyes. They had all seen the human message. They had all watched the demonstration of impossible power. General, his sensor officer reported, the human vessel is approaching. It will enter weapons range in 15 minutes. Nodded slowly. All ships' battle positions, prepare to fire on my command. The Grand Fleet spread out across space, forming attack patterns that had proven successful in 100 wars. The largest dreadnoughts moved to the front, their massive cannons charging with plasma energy. Smaller vessels fell into support positions, ready to exploit any weakness. It was a perfect formation, executed with the precision of an ancient military tradition. The Titan's wrath did not change course. It did not slow down. It simply continued forward, a mountain of metal drifting through the darkness toward the waiting fleet. On the human ship's bridge, Captain studied the tactical display with calm eyes. 8,000 ships. It was an impressive number. Back on Earth before the massacre, such a fleet would have been terrifying beyond imagination. Now it was simply a problem to be solved. "Reports," he ordered. Commander Vance checked her console. "All systems operating at full capacity. Shields are charged. Weapons are ready. The crew is at battle stations." Chief Engineer Cole's voice came through the intercom. "Singularity engine is stable, Captain. We have more power than we could ever need." Turned to his weapons officer. "Lieutenant Price, I want you to listen carefully. We are not here to kill. We are not here for revenge. We are here to send a message." Price looked up from her targeting systems. "Understood, Captain. What are my parameters?" "Disable only. Target engines, weapons, and power systems. Leave life support intact on every ship." Paused. "I want them helpless, not dead. I want them to go home and tell everyone what happened here." Price nodded, her fingers dancing across her console as she calculated thousands of targeting solutions. The Titan's Wrath's weapons could track every ship in the enemy fleet simultaneously. Its computers could process more data in a second than systems could handle in a year. "Ready, Captain," she reported. General watched the human ship enter weapons range. His hand trembled slightly as he raised it to give the order. "All ships," he commanded, "open fire." 8,000 vessels unleashed their fury at once. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds and energy beams streaked across space in a blinding storm of destruction. The combined assault could have cracked open a planet. It was the most powerful attack the military had ever launched. It accomplished nothing. The Titan's Wrath continued forward without slowing. Its shields absorbed every impact without strain, bending space itself to deflect the incoming fire. The storm of weapons fire simply curved around the human vessel like water flowing past a stone. Not a single shot reached the hull. Stared in disbelief. "That is impossible. Nothing can withstand that much firepower." His officers had no response. They could only watch as their greatest weapons proved utterly useless. "Continue firing," ordered, his voice cracking. "All weapons maximum power." The assault intensified, but the result was the same. The Titan's Wrath absorbed everything the fleet could deliver. Its shields shimmered with captured energy, glowing like trapped starlight. Inside, the human crew barely felt a vibration. Then the human ship responded. Price executed her targeting solutions with cold precision. The Titan's Wrath opened fire, and the universe changed. Beams of directed energy lanced out across the void, each one striking with surgical accuracy. They did not aim for hulls or bridges. They aimed for specific systems on specific ships, disabling engines and weapons with perfect accuracy. Dreadnoughts went dark as their power cores failed. Cruisers drifted helplessly as their propulsion systems died. Destroyers spun out of control as their navigation computers shut down. Ship after ship fell silent, their crews alive but their vessels reduced to floating metal. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, 8,000 warships hung motionless in space. Their weapons were dead. Their engines were cold. Their shields had failed. But their life support systems continued to function. Their crews remained alive, trapped inside vessels that could no longer fight or flee. General's flagship was the only ship left with partial power. Price had deliberately spared it, leaving its communications systems intact, wanted to report what he had witnessed. Stood on his darkened bridge, surrounded by the soft glow of emergency lights. His officers sat in shocked silence, unable to process what had happened. In 11 minutes, the greatest military force in galactic history had been completely neutralized by a single ship. "General," his communications officer whispered, "they are hailing us." Took a deep breath and accepted the transmission. Captain's face appeared on the screen, calm and composed, without anger or triumph. General said, "Your fleet is disabled but not destroyed. Your crews are alive. Your ships can be repaired. I want you to understand what that means." Found his voice. "What does it mean?" "It means we could have killed every one of you. We could have destroyed your ships, your stations, your colonies. We chose not to," leaned forward slightly. "We are not monsters, General. We are not what you would have been if our positions were reversed, but we are done being victims. Go home, tell your people what you saw, tell them what is coming." The transmission ended, stood alone in the darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of his fleet. He understood now what the humans wanted. They wanted to be afraid. And they had succeeded. High Counselor had ruled the Empire for 600 cycles. He had crushed rebellions, conquered worlds, and bent entire species to his will. He had never bowed to anyone. He had never surrendered. He had believed that his empire would last forever, that no force in the universe could challenge supremacy. He was wrong. The Titan's wrath entered orbit around Prime 3 days after the destruction of the Grand Fleet. It hung in the sky like a second moon, visible from the surface below. Citizens looked up at the massive vessel and felt something they had never experienced before. They felt powerless. They felt small. For the first time in 12,000 cycles, they understood what it meant to be at someone else's mercy. Summoned his remaining advisors to the throne room. General stood among them, still wearing the uniform of a defeated commander. The general had returned home with the remnants of his fleet, his ships limping through space on emergency power. He had told the High Counselor everything: the impossible shields, the surgical precision, the deliberate mercy. "They could have killed us all," said, his voice hollow. "Every ship, every soldier, they chose to let us live." Hex, the chief scientist, had spent the past 3 days analyzing every piece of data from the battle. Her findings were terrifying. "The human ship used perhaps 10% of its weapons capacity," she reported. "Its shields never dropped below maximum strength. Its systems showed no strain whatsoever." She paused, struggling to say the next words. "We were not a challenge to them. We were a demonstration." Closed his ancient eyes. He had lived long enough to understand when a war was over. The Empire could rebuild its fleet. It could construct new weapons. It could prepare for 1,000 cycles, and it would still lose. The humans had achieved something that all logic, all history, all expectation. They had become the most powerful force in the galaxy. "What do they want?" he asked. As if in answer, Lieutenant Torres opened a communication channel from the Titan's wrath. Captain's face appeared on the screens throughout the throne room. High Counselor said, "I am prepared to offer you terms." Straightened in his throne, trying to maintain some dignity. "Speak your terms, human." His expression remained calm. "First, the Empire will dismantle its military. You may keep defensive forces, but your days of conquest are over. Second, every species you have conquered will be granted immediate independence. They will govern themselves, make their own choices, build their own futures. Third, a new galactic council will be established to maintain peace among all species. Humanity will serve on this council, not as rulers but as guarantors." The senators murmured among themselves. These terms were harsh but not cruel. The humans were not demanding slavery or extinction. They were demanding change. "And if we refuse?" asked. His eyes hardened. "Then we will make these changes ourselves. It will not be pleasant for anyone." There was no threat in his voice, just simple truth. Looked around at his advisors, at the generals who could no longer protect him, at the scientists who could no longer explain the universe he lived in. He thought about 12,000 cycles of dominance, all ending in this moment. He thought about the species his empire had crushed, the worlds they had conquered, the lives they had destroyed. Perhaps, he realized, this ending was deserved. "We accept your terms," he said quietly. Commander Vance stood beside Captain as the transmission ended. She watched the old surrender and felt something complicated stir in her chest. Relief, satisfaction, and something else, something like sadness. "It is done," she said. Nodded slowly. "The first step is done. There is much more work ahead." He walked to the observation deck, where the stars spread out before him in infinite silence. Vance followed, understanding that he needed to speak. 40 years, said softly. 40 years of hiding, 40 years of building, 40 years of remembering what they did to us. He paused. There were times I dreamed of destroying them completely, burning their worlds, making them feel what we felt. But you did not, Vance said. No, turned to face her. Because then we would have become them. We would have become the monsters they expected us to be. That was never what we wanted. Later that day, addressed the galaxy. His message was broadcast on every frequency, translated into every language, received on every world that had ever suffered under rule. Billions of beings watched the human captain speak, wondering what this new power would mean for them. For 12,000 cycles, the Empire ruled through fear and force. That era is over. A new age is beginning. Paused, choosing his words carefully. Humanity does not seek dominion. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We want to protect it. He explained the new order, the Galactic Council, the independence of conquered species, the end of empires and the beginning of cooperation. But I want to be clear about one thing, he continued, his voice growing harder. We will be watching. Any species that tries to prey upon the weak, any government that tries to conquer and enslave will answer to us. The Titan's wrath is not the only ship we have built. There are more, many more. Across the galaxy, species that had lived in fear for thousands of cycles began to understand. They were no longer the dominant power. Humanity had taken their place, but unlike the humans were not interested in conquest. They were interested in justice. On Prime, Hex began writing a new entry in the Imperial archives. She documented the rise of humanity, the fall of the Empire, and the beginning of a new era. Future generations would study her words, trying to understand how a species dismissed as primitive had transformed itself into something unprecedented. She wrote about their technology, their determination, and their restraint. She wrote about a species that had been hunted and had chosen to become protectors rather than hunters. She wrote about power tempered by principle. Back on the Titan's wrath, the crew celebrated quietly. They had achieved what many had thought impossible. They had changed the galaxy, but Captain did not celebrate. He stood alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars, thinking about everything that had brought them to this moment. Commander Vance found him there hours later. "You should rest," she said. "We have won." Shook his head slowly. "We have begun. Winning takes longer." He turned to face her. "The galaxy is watching us now. They are wondering what kind of species we really are. We have to show them, not with weapons but with actions, with patience, with justice." Vance nodded, understanding. "We were the underdogs once. We were hunted. We survived anyway." "Yes," agreed. "Now it is our turn to make sure no one else has to live in fear." The Titan's wrath turned away from Prime and began its journey back into the darkness between stars. Behind it, a galaxy began to change. Empires crumbled. Species found freedom. Hope spread from world to world like light spreading at dawn. The monster ship was human, and the humans were just getting started.